Nora Calloway dragged the pine log uphill alone. Harmon watched from his horse on Greyhawk Ridge. Late October wind cutting through his blue coat. The log was full length, heavy enough that two men would have cursed hauling it. She had rope over her shoulder, black boots digging into rocky soil, her faded calico dress mud-stained to the knees. Most women would have quit an hour ago. She hadn't even slowed down. He nudged his horse down the slope. Black Pine Bluff came into view, cabin walls barely chest-high, no roof, surrounded by scattered tools and cut timber. A canvas tent sagged beside it, smoke rising thin and stubborn from a meager fire pit. She heard his approach and straightened, breathing hard. Didn't run. Didn't call for help. Just stood there, chin up, watching him come down that ridge like she was deciding whether to let him live. Afternoon, Cole said, dismounting. That's a lot of cabins for one person. Don't need charity from strangers. Her voice was steady, but her hands stayed on the rope like she might need to use it as a weapon. He studied the walls, examined the joints, then looked at the sky clouds thickening off the Greywall Mountains, light already fading at the edges. The roof won't hold without proper bracing. The storm's coming off those mountains in 2 weeks. Maybe less. I'll manage. Cole looked at her then. Really looked. A scar ran from her left temple to her jawline, old and pale against deep, weathered skin. Not fresh. Not an accident. Earned. Survived. She felt his gaze land on it, and her shoulders tightened like she was bracing for the words she had heard 100 times before. She touched it once, unconsciously, and lifted her chin higher. I'm not beautiful, she whispered. Harmon met her eyes. Hold them. Didn't flinch. Didn't look away. Good, he said quietly. I need real, not fancy. Fancy doesn't last a winter out here. She blinked. Something moved across her face. Not quite trust, not yet. But something. The first crack in a wall she had been building longer than this cabin. He picked up her hammer. Tested its weight. I walked to the nearest wall without asking permission. You got nails? She hesitated, then nodded toward the crate. I can pay with labor. I cook. I mend. Fair enough. He examined the joints without looking up. What's your name? Nora Calloway. Harmon. I run cattle 3 miles south at Harmon Flats. He glanced once at the darkening sky above the Greywall Mountains. We will start on that roof frame tomorrow. First light. Nora watched him ride back toward the dark pine grove until the trees swallowed him whole. Then she sat down hard on a stump, hands shaking against her knees. First snow in 2 weeks. First hope in 6 months. She wasn't sure yet which one scared her more. He came back the next morning like he said he would. Nora heard the hoofbeats before she saw Harmon riding down from Greyhawk Ridge at first light, blue coat dark against the pale October sky. She was already working. Black boots caked in rocky soil, faded dress hanging heavy with mud from the morning's labor. She had been up before dawn, hauling timber, measuring boards, refusing to let the cold slow her hands. She didn't stop when he dismounted. I told you I don't need help. You told me you'd manage. He tied his horse to a pine and walked the perimeter of the cabin walls without invitation, running his hand along the joints, pressing his weight against the corners. Managing and surviving aren't the same thing out here. I know the difference. Then you know this roof won't hold. He stopped at the northeast corner, crouched down, and examined the base. Storm comes off the Greywall Mountains with weight behind it. These walls will stand. This frame won't. He stood and looked at her directly. You'll lose the whole structure before January. Nora's jaw tightened. Her hands stayed on the rope. She had built every inch of what stood before them with nothing but her own back and the last of her money. She did not need a stranger from Harmon Flats telling her it wasn't enough. I don't take charity. I'm not offering any. Cole picked up her spare hammer from the crate, without asking. You cook. You mend. I fixed that roof frame before the first snow hit Black Pine Bluff. He tested the hammer's weight and walked toward the wall. Equal trade. Nothing owed on either side. Nora studied him for a long moment. The weathered face. The calloused hands. The way he looked at her work with respect instead of pity. "You're already touching my hammer," she said finally. Seemed faster than arguing. She almost smiled. Almost. "First light tomorrow," she said. "Don't be late. 3 days into the work, the silence between them began to change. It started small. The way Cole handed her boards before she asked. The way Nora moved the nail crate to his side without being told. A rhythm developing through shared labor at Blackpine Bluff, quiet and careful, like two people learning a language neither had spoken in years. They were fitting the roof braces when Nora spoke first. "Silas liked his whiskey," she said, not looking up from the beam she was studying. "It started after we lost our first baby. Got mean when he drank. Mean and loud and certain everything wrong in his life was something I had done." Cole kept hammering. Listening. The night of the fire, he came home already gone. Her voice stayed flat, controlled, the way a person speaks when they have decided the words won't own them anymore. Yelling about supper. "About me." Knocked the lamp over mid-fight. The whole east wall caught before either of us moved. She paused. "I tried to pull him out. Even after everything I went back in for him. Fire didn't care about that part. Neither did Ashenford." Cole set the hammer down slowly. "They buried him as a deacon," she said. "Bury me a witch." The wind moved through the dark pine grove. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "Lydia was beautiful," Cole said finally, his voice low. "Everyone in Ashenford loved her. Parties, dances, people watching her walk into a room." He looked at the Greywall Mountains. "She wanted a life I couldn't build her. I knew she was unhappy. Kept hoping the ranch would be enough." He was quiet. "When she died, my first thought was relief. Been carrying that ever since." Nora looked at him then. Really looked. Two people standing in the skeleton of a half-built cabin, holding the weight of lives that hadn't fit right, finally setting them down somewhere safe. "We don't have to be who they made us," she said quietly. Cole picked up his hammer. "No," he agreed. "We don't." The cabin grew one beam at a time, and so did something else neither of them had a name for yet. By the second week, Cole knew to bring the longer nails on mornings when Nora was working the upper frame. Nora knew to have coffee strong and ready when the temperature dropped below what either of them acknowledged out loud. No discussion. No arrangement made. Just two people paying close enough attention to each other that words became unnecessary. The walls at Blackpine Bluff rose steadily. Chimney fitted. Windows framed. The door hung level on the first try. Cole stood back and looked at it with quiet satisfaction, and Nora ran her hand along the edge checking for gaps, and when she found none she said nothing, but he saw it. The small exhale. The almost imperceptible loosening around her eyes. That was enough. Evenings they sat by the fire inside the half-finished cabin, canvas overhead, the Greywall Mountains dark and massive beyond the tree line. Cole mended tack in his black pants and worn shirt, calloused hands moving through familiar work while his mind went somewhere else entirely. Nora pulled a water-stained book from her pack and opened it without ceremony. "Do you read?" she asked. "Barely," he admitted. "Never had much schooling." She turned to a marked page and began. Homer. Penelope waiting. Odysseus lost at sea. Her voice was soft and unhurried, turning ancient words into something warm and immediate, like the story had been written for this specific fire in this specific unfinished cabin on this specific ridge above the world. Cole stopped moving his hands. He listened the way a man listens when he has been starving for something so long he forgot it had a name. Not just the story, the voice, the care she took with every word, the way she read like the people in those pages deserved to be treated gently. Somewhere around midnight, she closed the book. The fire crackled between them. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. The blizzard came off the Greywall Mountains without warning. 1 hour the sky was iron gray and still. The next, wind hit Blackpine Bluff like something alive and furious, driving snow sideways through every gap in the canvas overhead. Cole secured the tarp while Nora banked the fire high. By nightfall the temperature had dropped to something neither of them spoke about directly. Outside was no longer a possibility. The world had shrunk to the four walls they had built together, and the single blanket Nora pulled from her pack without comment. They sat close enough to share warmth. Not touching. Careful with the distance. She read by firelight until her voice grew soft, and the words began to blur. Cole sat beside her, shoulder near her shoulder, listening to Penelope wait for a man who kept finding reasons not to come home. Somewhere deep in the third hour, the fire settled low and Nora's head drooped, and she was gone asleep between one sentence and the next. He didn't move. The blizzard screamed, off the mountains, all night. He sat still and let her sleep. It was somewhere past midnight when she woke up screaming. Not loud. The kind of scream that has been compressed by years of survival into something small and devastating. Her whole body rigid, hands gripping the blanket, eyes open and seeing something that wasn't there. Cole crossed the room in 3 steps. Crouched low. Hands open and visible at his sides. Nora. His voice was steady and quiet. You're safe. Fire's banked. He's gone. You're at Black Pine Bluff. You're here. She was shaking so hard her teeth were near chattering. He sat down on the floor beside her bedroll and stayed there close enough to be a wall between her and whatever lived in the dark behind her eyes. Not reaching. Just a present. Slowly, the shaking eased. Slowly she leaned. Her head came to rest against his shoulder like it had always belonged there. He went completely still, afraid to break whatever fragile thing had just been handed to him. At dawn she stirred and whispered without fully waking. You smell like pine smoke and safety. You feel like home. Cole stared at the banked fire and did not move until the light came. Morning broke clear and sharp over Black Pine Bluff, the kind of cold, bright silence that follows a storm like an apology. Nora was already at the door when Cole stepped outside. She had her coat pulled tight, black boots leaving fresh prints in the snow as she moved around the cabin perimeter checking for damage. The Greywall Mountains stood clean and massive against the pale sky, every peak outlined like someone had cut them from paper. 3 days of fury, and now this stillness, so complete it felt dishonest.
Cole saw them before she did.
Horse tracks. A single set, circling the cabin in a wide, deliberate loop, cutting close on the east side with the window. Whoever made them had stood there long enough that the snow was packed and disturbed, weight shifting back and forth across several hours.
Standing.
Watching. Patient as a man with nothing to lose and something to gain. Nora crouched beside the tracks and said nothing for a long moment. Those didn't come from Harmon Flats, she said quietly. No. Cole followed the line of prints toward the dark pine grove where they disappeared into shadow between the trees. Someone rode out from Ashenford. Waded through the storm. I watched the windows. The grove stood dark and dense at the edge of the bluff, the kind of place where a man could see everything and be seen by nothing. Cole knew without needing to say it whose hand had sent someone this far in a blizzard just to look. Harlan Voss. Nora stood and looked at the tracks the way she had looked at everything since the day he first rode down from Greyhawk Ridge chin up, jaw set, refusing to give fear the satisfaction of showing on her face. But her hands were still at her sides, and he noticed that too. The storm had passed. But something else was moving toward Black Pine Bluff, now quieter than wind, colder than snow, and far more dangerous than any blizzard that had ever come off those mountains. Ashenford had not forgotten Nora Calloway. Nora dressed like she was riding into battle. Black boots polished as far as the worn leather would allow. The faded dress brushed clean. Chin raised before she even climbed onto the wagon seat. Cole rode beside her in his blue coat, black pants, jaw set against the cold and whatever was coming 20 miles of frozen road between Black Pine Bluff and Ashenford, neither of them speaking much, the Greywall Mountains watching from a distance the way they always did. Ashenford was Sunday quiet when they arrived, which meant everyone was already outside. Conversation stopped the moment Nora stepped down from the wagon. She walked with her scar in full winter sunlight and her eyes straight ahead, and Cole fell into step beside her close enough that his presence made a statement he hadn't yet found the words for. Women pulled children sideways. Men stared from doorframes with expressions that lived somewhere between contempt and hunger. Preacher Blackwell was waiting on the mercantile steps.
Flanked.
Deliberate. Practiced. Brother Harmon. His voice carried across the street without effort. This woman's reputation is known throughout this county. You defile yourself and her both with this arrangement. Then Harlan Voss stepped forward from the gathered crowd, hat in hand, smiling like something that had learned to imitate warmth without understanding it. Nora, smooth, familiar. My offer at the boarding house still stands. Honest work. Honest wages. End this arrangement before it costs you what little standing you have left in this town. The whole of Ashenford held its breath. Cole felt it then, every eye on Main Street pressing against him like a physical weight. The judgment. The expectation. The old familiar pulled toward the safe answer, the clean answer, the answer that protected the Harmon name and cost nothing visible. He opened his mouth. It's just work. For words. Quiet. Devastating. Nora went very still beside him. The stillness of someone who has been here before and always knew they would be here again. Then she walked to the wagon without a word and did not look back. The door closed between them like a verdict. No words. No tears. Just the solid sound of the door. Cole himself had hung on a cold November morning, fitted level, sealed tight, built to last, closing in his face at Black Pine Bluff with a finality that had nothing to do with wood or hinges. He stood on that porch for a long moment. Then he rode back to Harmon Flats alone. The ranch house was warm, well built. Every board is seasoned and true. Cole sat at the kitchen table with a whiskey bottle in front of him and didn't touch it. Outside the frost-glazed windows, Lydia's grave sat on the hill in the last gray light of afternoon, patient and permanent, watching him the way it always had. He had done it again. Choose the clean answer over the true one. Chosen the approval of people whose opinions had never once kept him warm over the realest thing he had known since before he could remember what real felt like. For words. Quiet as a knife between ribs. It's just work. Ezra Cole rode up to Harmon Flats 3 days later, weathered as old saddle leather, and didn't bother dismounting. He looked down at Cole standing in the yard with the expression of a man who has lived long enough to have no patience left for cowardice, dressed up as caution. That woman built more from broken pieces than most men manage with everything whole, he said. Are you going to let fear win twice? He rode off without waiting for an answer. Cole stood in the empty yard and looked at Lydia's grave on the hill until the cold drove him inside. Christmas morning, Nora opened her cabin door at Black Pine Bluff and found wildflowers on the step, frozen inside a shell of ice, preserved like a memory that refused to die. No note. No name. Just flowers in the middle of winter from a place where nothing was supposed to grow. She carried them inside. Then she sat down at the table Cole had helped her build and wept. He walked into Ashenford's church on a Sunday morning with his hat in his hands and his excuses left behind at Harmon Flats. The congregation was full. Every pew was packed with the same faces that had stood on Main Street and watched. Preacher Blackwell stopped mid-sentence when Cole walked to the front and turned to face them all, the merchants, the elders, the women who circled Harmon Flats like opportunity, the men who had nodded along while a scarred woman was buried alive in their gossip. He didn't clear his throat. Didn't apologize for the interruption. Her name is Nora Calloway, he said. And I'm here to tell you what she is because I stood in this town and told you what she wasn't, and I've been ashamed of it every day since. The church went completely still. He told them everything. Silas and the drinking and the fire and the woman who went back into the flames for a man who had never deserved her. He told them what Ashenford had done with that story, how they had shaped it into something that served them and buried everything true. He told them what she had built alone at Black Pine Bluff with broken hands and no help and no hope while they threw stones from the warm safety of their pews. Then he told them about himself. For words on Main Street, the cowardice behind them, what they had cost. He put his hat on and walked out before anyone could respond. Nora was on the roof when he arrived at Black Pine Bluff, hammering the final shingles alone, the way she had started everything, not waiting, not hoping, just working. He dismounted, picked up the spare hammer, and climbed the ladder without asking permission.
She didn't stop him.
They finished the roof together in silence, every nail the last nail, Every beam the final piece of the thing they had built through the worst winter either had ever survived. Sitting on the ridgeline breathing hard, the Greywall Mountains vast and patient before them, Cole spoke without looking away from the peaks. I want to build a life with you, Nora. Not beautiful, not fancy, just real. The mountains said nothing. They didn't need to. Spring came to Black Pine Bluff the way truth comes quietly, and then all at once. First the snow pulled back from the south-facing slope. Then the rocky soil softened. Then one morning Nora opened the cabin door, and the air smelled like something other than survival, and she stood in the doorway for a long time just breathing it in. The wagons from Ashenford arrived on a Tuesday. No announcement. No fanfare. Just families pulling up the bluff road with lumber stacked in the beds and tools in hand and food baskets covered in cloth-ashamed faces, doing the only honest thing shame can do when it finally decides to be useful. Cole stood beside Nora and watched them come. Men who had stared from doorframes. Women who had clutched their children sideways. All of them are here now with working hands and nowhere to hide. The Calloway barn rose in 3 days. Framed by the same community that had once thrown stones every post, every beam, every plank a kind of reckoning. Nora watched it go up without softening and without bitterness, which was its own kind of strength. Preacher Blackwell came awkward and quiet and left the same way. Harlan Voss arrived hat in hand with polished words and left dismissed not with anger, not with satisfaction, just with the simple absence of any power he had ever imagined he held over her. Even the dark pine grove felt smaller in the light of spring. The Hope Garden went in on a warm March morning. Carrots, beans, potatoes in straight rows, and wildflowers pressed into the edges because Nora wanted color and had earned the right to want it. Their hands worked the soil together, planning harvest, building forward, speaking the language of people with somewhere to be. One golden evening Cole finished the porch bench, and they sat together watching the Greywall Mountains turn purple in the fading light. "Marry me," he said quietly. "When you're ready. Could be tomorrow.
Could be years.
I'm not going anywhere." Nora took his hand. "Ask me when the wildflowers in the Hope Garden bloom full." Across the meadow at Black Pine Bluff, small and determined, and reaching hard toward everything that was still possible, the first wildflowers were already there. Beautiful fades like summer paint. Fancy breaks under winter wind. But real life builds a life that holds. And in that holding, broken things don't just mend. They become something stronger.